Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about the immigration scandal in Martha's Vineyard, Adnan Syed's conviction has been overturned, and Biden's stunning 60 Minutes interview. Let's jump in. All right, guys, it's good to be back with you this week. Thanks for holding down the fort without me last go around. You and Jack did a great job. Wait, actually, I take that back. I was here last week. It was 2 weeks ago.
Are you drunk? It's noon.
Time is meaningless to me these days. I can't keep track of where I am when.
Time is a flat circle.
I was here last week, but I guess what I'm thinking is Jack's gonna have to be in for me again next week because I am leaving for Paris on Thursday.
Are you excited?
Well, actually, I'm leaving for Ohio on Thursday. I have to speak there, but then I go to Paris. I'm pretty excited. This is like kind of funny, but this is my first time traveling without like a man traveling internationally without a man planning it all. Like usually it's been a dad or a boyfriend. So I'm a little nervous just about like handling the currency and like, I don't know, just little things like that. Are you going by yourself? No, my friend Amisha is coming with me, and she's cool. My travel buddy, and she travels a lot as well too. But she's done a lot of travel in the Caribbean. I've done a lot of domestic travel. Neither of us have really gone to Europe extensively. We've both been to Europe before, like not extensively. So, but I think we'll be good. We made lots of reservations. We're pretty friendly girls, so hopefully.
Is it a little bit last minute? Are you planning this trip?
Yeah, well, I've been keeping an eye on flights. I've been wanting to go to Europe basically since they took away masks, right? All throughout COVID, I was wanting to travel internationally, but I didn't want to do the whole mask thing. And like, I want travel should be luxurious. You shouldn't feel like you're on a safari or trying to like get through a level of Survivor to have a nice trip. So I was waiting for some of that to normalize in the airports. But the problem was, as soon as it did, everybody else had the same idea, and tickets to Europe, and keep in mind, tickets to Europe out of Atlanta, which is on the East Coast, which is a direct flight to most major airports, were like $2,500 all summer, which is crazy. Wow. Before COVID, I went for direct for like $600 to Amsterdam. So I wasn't willing to pay that. I was waiting for them to come down. And what was weird is it's just like they dropped like that, like out of nowhere. It's like they halved in price. And so we jumped on it and booked it kind of last minute, and I kind of thought it'd be nice to go in the fall, so we are scrambling a little bit, but I think it'll all work out. My only concern is I have to go from Ohio to DC to meet Amisha, and then we're gonna fly out of DC, and hopefully if everything goes as planned, I'll be at Dulles from like 11:30 a.m. Friday until we depart at like 6:30 p.m. and I now have Delta Lounge access. So I'm hoping that it's like a nice setup. I can rest in the lounge, but I've never been in Dulles, and I've heard terrible things about it. So I don't really know what to expect as far as.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. We very rarely would we go. We would when we lived in DC, we'd always go out of Reagan because we lived near there, and when we didn't, we'd go out of the Baltimore one. But I have been in and out of Dulles a few times. My boyfriend loves the lounges, so he has access to almost every lounge. There's always some lounge somewhere because he does all these credit card perks and stuff. But I've never really cared that much. So when it's just me, I don't have access to it. I go to it with him sometimes, and they're nice. You can get free food and stuff, but like I don't know, it doesn't do that much for me.
Well, some of the ones at bigger airports, which I don't know if Dulles is this category, but like if you're through JFK or something like that, like they'll actually have beds that you can rent for the time that you're there. You can shower while you're there. Some of them will even have like gyms attached. That way if you have really long layover, like I'm going to, you're not just like sitting there drinking and eating. So I'm hoping for that, but we shall see. Yeah, because everybody who lives in DC hates Dulles, so we'll find out. But you know what? No matter what, I know I'm going to have a much better travel experience than the people at the top of our news deck did over the past week. I am referring to the asylum seekers and undocumented immigrants who were sent to Martha's Vineyard by Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. So I want to jump into that. I know Brad and I have been sort of in communication about the story back and forth. This is one of those things that is why we made the podcast, because we're often working through these kinds of topics behind the scenes and trying to figure out what we think about them, what the principled approach is to them, what the actual truth is. And we want to be able to do that with you guys too, because I think that there is a lot of confusion over this, but the nuts and bolts are that he did this basically as a bit of a political stunt to essentially try to say these are sanctuary cities. You claim that you are open for immigrants. We are too full. We can't handle these things at our borders in places like Florida and in Texas. And so if you say you're, so open for immigrants, we're going to send them your way. We'll see how you handle it. And I think he was obviously anticipating that the town...
DeSantis, right? In Florida.
This is DeSantis, yes. And Martha's Vineyard is a very upper crust, very left-leaning vacation area. It's very pretty and pristine, and obviously does not get a huge influx of immigrants. They do get an influx of tourists every year. Like the town more than doubles in size every year for vacationers. But I think his whole point was to try to show these people aren't actually compassionate, that there would be this huge freak out when they dump these people there. And that's not really what happened, although we'll get into the reviews in a minute. But it really did seem as a whole, the town actually did try to rally and take care of these people.
I want to, Hannah, I want to put this in a little bit of context too. So DeSantis has really made news because he did this in a very dramatic way, right? He sent them to Martha's Vineyard, which is like where the Obamas vacation. It's like a bougie liberal enclave in Massachusetts, where I'm from. But this has actually been going on for some time. Texas and other states have been sending migrants to New York City, to Washington, D.C., just by the hundreds or by the thousands to self-described sanctuary cities. Because they have huge numbers coming in at the border towns, and because of what is essentially a kind of catch and release system for anyone who claims asylum that the Biden administration has reinstated. And so then what they've been doing for several months now is sending some of them just to random parts of the country. And we're going to talk about the specifics of the Martha's Vineyard one, but it's been a voluntary thing. Like, these people want to go to New York City, we'll pay for you to go on a bus. You want to go to Washington, D.C., here you go. And so we have to analyze this story in the broader context of this. And also another piece, Biden has been doing this. The actual Biden administration has been moving migrants throughout the country as part of a relocation process. What makes this atypical or unusual is only that it is extremely like political stunty, right? The Martha's Vineyard angle, just the fact that they're sending 50, that these were actually migrants who were in Texas, but Ron DeSantis was facilitating the transportation because they were going to go to Florida. So, and then he is just such a magnet for controversy, for, attention, and he leans into that. And that's why this particular incident has become so viral. But I want people to be familiar with the context that this is happening in, which is huge problems at the border. It's just chaos, frankly. A catch and release system where anyone who claims asylum, or many times, is just being released into the continental U.S. And so these border towns are getting tens of thousands of people just coming in, and it's creating chaos. And so these red states have been doing this for a while, sending them to places, because it's easy, right? If you live in New York City, to say, or Washington, D.C. is a great example. They say, we're a sanctuary city. No human being is illegal. We stand with refugees. That's because they get a very small, manageable amount, right? But then as soon as they got a few thousand on a bus from Texas, they declared a state of emergency and requested the National Guard. And it's like, my gut reaction to this, and the specifics of the Martha's Vineyard one get kind of messy, but just in general, my initial reaction to all of this was, I don't like stunts that involve people as props. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Republicans are starting that. Democrats have been using immigrants as political props for my entire living memory. And it is kind of savage politically. Like, if you just set aside your morality, it's kind of genius. Like, politically, to expose the sanctuary city elites and say, here you go, you love immigrants, no human beings illegal, here's a few hundred bus load. Like, it's savage. Politically, it is brilliant, I think. And I also think there's nothing inherently wrong with it and that this is a big if the migrants are fully informed, if they consent to the travel, there's nothing like it makes sense to spread them out throughout the country, right? Like, they shouldn't all just be in some border towns in Texas and in New Mexico. Like, they should go to where there are jobs and opportunity in different spaces. So I don't know. What was your general take and interpretation on this whole bigger picture question before we analyze, the tiny details of the Martha's Vineyard scandal?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I sort of peripherally knew this was going on before the Martha's Vineyard scandal. I had not been paying that close of attention until this one, and we'll get into this in a minute, but the details around this did very much bother me. I think my reaction to it was very guttural, and it was very like, we don't play politics with people's lives. And I think that's always been my issue with immigration, is it really, on both sides at times, can lead to this severe dehumanization of people. And it leads to a lack of empathy for them and their situations. And the reality is that these people, to my understanding, who are here, are actually asylum seekers. So they are doing the legal thing and coming here and seeking asylum. They're following the only channels available to them. And there's no reason to be punitive towards them when these are literally people fleeing communism. They're from Venezuela. They're trying to escape communist regimes. They could be huge allies to us in trying to uphold our systems and capitalism and preaching about why these other ways of running societies are so detrimental and harmful. And instead, there is this real lack of empathy, this sort of this thing where it's just fine to kind of play a joke at their expense almost, right? And if it is voluntary and it's something where it was sort of like, we're going to have a way to distribute people across the country to ensure that resources are able to get further into the United States and not just be trapped in these border towns that are being overwhelmed. That would be a great way to handle an immigration system, to say, we've got jobs we're looking to fill across the country. Let's have a connection process where you're coming in, we're processing you quickly, and then we're helping you be directed towards where there actually are jobs and there are programs and there are places we could use labor. That would be a really smart thing to do. That's not really the intention here. I think it's more meant as a stunt. It's meant to sort of be a gotcha troll moment. And at the end of the day, these are real people's lives who are impacted. So when I've seen some of this happening, I just think, how scared would you be? You've already made this really dangerous journey to escape communism, to get to another country. You're just trying to come here and keep your family alive and be able to eat and be able to work. And those are admirable things. And now you're going to be used at the expense of a joke, basically, and dumped in another town where you don't have any idea where you are and you don't speak the language. Like, that's terrifying.
I guess I don't really get what's punitive about it, because it worked out great for the guys that got sent to Martha's Vineyard. Lots of them are saying, yeah, or some people are saying, I wish I'd gone. I was offered and I didn't, right? They went there. The town, some people were like, we can't handle all these immigrants, but actually a lot of them rallied. A lot of them opened up their homes. They gave resources, and then actually they were all moved out of Martha's Vineyard very quickly, which is a little bit funny. But these people have been taken care of. Massachusetts is one of the like wealthiest, most prosperous places in the country to go. They're only a couple hours from Boston. If they want to go to Boston, they could catch a bus very easily. I guess I don't really see, they're being used as props in a stunt, absolutely. But I guess I don't really see how they're being harmed.
Well, one, I mean, they're not okay. They got removed to a military base. Now they're on their third place. They're being passed around like pawns. And I do think that there is an element to this where people are sort of like, ha ha ha, you came here illegally, this is what you get, And even the Martha's Vineyard thing, when they were dumped in the town, they were basically abandoned there and had to wander around as this group of people and even look for an office that represented the actual town to try to figure out what to do. And I think that is mean-spirited. I don't think there's anything about this where anybody involved is saying we care about the well-being of these people. We're really trying to make sure that they get the resources they need. I think DeSantis, very much in his messaging and everybody else around this messaging that supports these actions, has kind of had to has tried to say oh, look, they didn't have the resources they said they had there. They didn't have the ability to actually help these people. They didn't actually want them. And it's so you wanted them to show up there and not get resources, and to show up there and to be stuck and stranded. You wanted them to be in this situation. That feels really mean and punitive towards them, and just, again, there's this dehumanization
in these border towns, right?
No.
So you're sending them from somewhere where they're overwhelmed, they have too many people, there aren't resources for them, to somewhere that says they do have resources and opportunity and welcome them. And then if it doesn't work out, if it works out, great. And if it doesn't work out, it shows that the sanctuary city people are not practicing what they preach. I guess I do agree that it is savage, it is callous, but I guess I'm just not I think they make a good point. Like, from Massachusetts, they have all this stuff about how there are sanctuary cities, about how they have all these programs, and everybody. Martha's Vineyard, if you go around Martha's Vineyard, you bike, it's beautiful in the summer. You will see all those signs. Hate has no home here. No human being is illegal. Blah, 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 blah. And yet they had them sent out to a military base within 48 hours. It's like people there have 3 rental homes, right? They could have opened them up. I think there's some real, I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about this whole thing. I think it is callous, but yeah, I also think they're exposing some real hypocrisy here. It's very, very easy in Massachusetts to say, anybody who is uncomfortable with immigration is just a racist. Illegal immigration is fine, whatever. But like, these border towns are really in trouble. They're really overwhelmed, right? I think immigration is overall great, but huge amounts of immigrants going to one place that can't really handle them is clearly not functional. It's not working.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess I think the backlash to it is you're making some nuanced and measured points, but some of the backlash to this has just been hysterical.
Well, people have taken, and we can talk about that in a minute, it's definitely gotten to a level where I think it's getting a little bit hyperbolic. But I also think, look at the amount of money that these governors are spending to carry out these stunts. I saw it reported that DeSantis spent $12 million or something on this whole thing. They had pamphlets printed up they were giving them. They chartered planes for them. This was a whole effort. And it's just, this is where we want to spend our resources, is a gotcha in the culture war for leftists to say they're hypocrites. I don't care if the left is hypocritical. I actually care about immigrants. I actually care that we fix our immigration system. There's a reason that these towns are overwhelmed, and it's not because we don't need immigrants to come here. It's not because there aren't jobs and things that they could be plugged into our society and doing. It's because our immigration system is really messed up and is limiting the process for people to come here and just swiftly get processed and get legal and start working, right? And instead of spending those resources or that political power or even that, sort of capital and command in the media around the conversation to direct it towards how do we streamline our immigration system? How do we make it to where it works efficiently? How do we make it to where people aren't coming in and getting trapped in these certain little regions and instead actually are getting the ability to come here and go where the jobs are? Because I don't think you have to send the people coming to America to where the jobs are. I think they will naturally find those and flow if they can have that freedom of movement, right? That's basic supply and demand that applies to labor as much as it does to the supply and demand of goods. Right now, we're stymieing those basic market signals, and we're preventing people from being able to go and therefore acclimating to society in a way that would actually make sense. You used to see New York City had a huge influx of immigrants, right? This is where the processing used to be back when we had Ellis Island. You didn't see that they were overwhelmed by it. You saw that become the greatest city in the world thanks to this, but it's because the immigration process was streamlined, it was efficient, it was quick, and the people got to work and they started building up communities there. We have prevented that in the modern era of anti-immigration policy. And so as a whole, that's where the focal point should be. And I have to say too, I think that the fact that I know that people like DeSantis are disingenuous about this. He doesn't want to fix our immigration system. He doesn't want more immigrants to come here. He doesn't want to make immigrants' lives easier, right? They want to limit immigration on that side of the aisle at this point. They want to prevent people from being able to come here. And it doesn't even make any difference to them whether these are asylum seekers or refugees or people trying to sneak into the country or criminals. They lump them all in one bucket in how they talk about them and how they approach them and really, I think, how they want to see them treated under public policy. And so, maybe the left is just ingenuous and not as supportive and hands on the ground as they like to say that they are. But I do think as a whole, the response you saw from Martha's Vineyard, and we have a couple clips we'll play in a minute, but it seemed that the majority of people did exactly what they said they would. They donated money. The town actually had to put out social media posts and say, we don't need any more donations. We're good. They donated close to $175,000 within a 2-day time period. There were people setting up shelters. There were people volunteering goods and services and items. We saw a lot of the legal community spring into action. And so I don't think that really they got the response from this very leftist community that they thought they would get. There were some people who were upset about the immigrants being there, but really it seemed most of them actually did rally.
Yeah. I agree with you. They actually responded pretty positively, though they did get them out of there in short order.
They did.
So so it's a little bit mixed there. I guess what I'd say though is I'm somebody who supports legal immigration, streamlining all those things. I will say that that's not something governors can fix, right? They can't change our immigration laws. We've been waiting for Congress to do that for decades. And the president, and specifically some of the president's border policies, while not accompanied by actual immigration reform, have created these untenable situations. And so I think that you're right. Would I love to see resources going to that streamlining? Yes. But I think these stunts are in part born out of politics, but also in part born out of frustration. Like to force, but I think part of the goal is to put pressure on Democrats like Massachusetts, put pressure on, your senators and on Biden to help us and fix the situation. Because right now it's just not being fixed. And someone like Ron DeSantis can't change it, right? So are they partly motivated with kind of, mean-spirited, on the libs politics in mind? I think yes. But I also think they're born out of it in part by a genuine sense of frustration, because the border and the immigration system is a hot mess. It has the Gang of 12 or whatever, maybe it was Gang of 8, I can never keep up with all the gangs. They had a plan to really fix a lot of it and improve the system about a decade ago. But since then, there's just been nothing. Both sides refuse to compromise. They want this issue to rally up their voters. And so to the extent that it puts pressure on Washington, which is controlled by Democrats right now, to actually fix the problem, that could be a good outcome. But let's talk about the Texas sheriff, an elected Democrat in Bexar County, who is apparently opening an criminal investigation into Ron DeSantis over him sending these people to Martha's Vineyard. Let's play a clip that we've got here.
Everyone. We are opening up a case with an investigation with regard to the suspected activities involving the 48 migrants from Venezuela that, as we understand it at this point, the facts of the case at this point, are that on Wednesday, September 14th, here in Bexar County in the city of San Antonio, our understanding is that a Venezuelan migrant was paid what we would call a bird dog fee to recruit approximately 50 migrants from the area around a migrant resource center on San Pedro here in San Antonio. As we understand it, 48 migrants were lured, I will use the word lured, under false pretenses into staying at a hotel for a couple of days. They were taken by airplane. At a certain point, they were shuttled to an airplane where they were flown to Florida and then eventually flown to Martha's Vineyard, again, under false pretenses is the information that we have, that they were promised work, they were promised the solution to several of their problems. They were taken to Martha's Vineyard from what we can gather for little more than a photo op, video op, and then they were unceremoniously stranded in Martha's Vineyard.
So I've got to say, Hannah, I don't take this very seriously. I think the moral criticisms of what DeSantis has done are fair game, but the idea that this was a criminal act to me seems like kind of a joke.
Yeah, I don't really know what statute that would be found under. I think that, in my opinion, this is clearly unethical, especially if the people were lied to, right? It's one thing to use people's political pawns and pull these stunts and move them all over, and they know what's going on and they're volunteering for it and they're willing to accept the risk. It is a very different thing morally to me if they were lied to, which I've been working to comb through this. It's been a little bit difficult to be sure, were they lied to, were they not? But I think increasingly all signs point to they were given some false information to get them to take this trip. But I don't know that it's illegal to lie to somebody and get them to take a trip. Like I'm not sure how you would.
I mean, and
that.
the sheriff was actually asked, and he couldn't point to any law that was actually broken. He just said that I'm not, and this is a quote, "I'm not able to definitively say here's the statute that they broke, either federal, state, or local. But what I can tell you is it's just wrong from a human rights perspective what was done to these folks." Like, sir, okay, you're a sheriff. Like, that's just your opinion then, right? You can't,
right.
Like, if there's no crime, then you shouldn't be investigating somebody.
Well, this gets back into what we were saying about the Libertarian Party's tweet about Liz Cheney a few weeks ago. You can't threaten to put your political opponents in jail just because you don't like them or just because you don't agree with what they're doing or just because you think they're morally bad. That's not how things work. That's not how we want things to work, to be honest. Like, that's just really short-sighted.
And all the Democrats are jumping on this and are like, yes, King, lock him up. And I'm like, you guys literally hated this about Trump. You are not even looking into this to see, is this investigation legit or not? Turns out the sheriff in question is a scandal-ridden elected Democrat, right? This isn't some like neutral law enforcement action. In fact, they've had big immigration scandals in that area. So I agree with you. It's kind of hard for me to tell. Were these people weren't lied to completely. They were told they were going to Massachusetts. They signed consent waivers. But were they misled about what was waiting for them there? I think potentially yes. Like we have these pamphlets that they were given.
Yes. So there's a couple attorneys on the ground. Here's the thing. I trust attorneys on the ground, specifically immigration attorneys, probably the most in these situations because they are most familiar with the laws, which are very complicated and convoluted. They're actually working with these clients. They probably speak their language or have translators. So there's been several of them that have been speaking out. Lawyers for Civil Rights, which is a nonprofit legal aid group, and they're representing 30 of these people that were sent there right now. They told NBC News they also had concerns over the legality of the stunt, given the misleading nature of the information in the leaflets. They said this is additional evidence that shows in writing that those false representations were made in order to induce our clients to travel. And that's from a quote from their litigation director, Orrin Selstrom. There's another attorney on the ground, Rachel Self, who's a Boston immigration attorney, and she gave a statement saying that the immigrants have been given falsified U.S. addresses by immigration officials, perhaps ensuring they'd be deemed in the country illegally. We've got a actually clip from her. Let's roll that real fast.
Arrived last night make it clear that they were lied to again and again and fraudulently induced to board the planes. They were told there was a surprise present for them and that there would be jobs and housing awaiting for them when they arrived. This was obviously a sadistic lie. Not only did those responsible for this stunt know that there was no housing and no employment awaiting the migrants, they also very intentionally chose not to call ahead to any single office authority on Martha's Vineyard so that even the most basic human needs arrangements could be made, ensuring that no help awaited the migrants at all was the entire point.
So the point that's made here that I take seriously is the fact that they didn't call ahead to the immigration authorities. I think that's a pretty fair critique. I do think when we talk about these like immigration activist lawyers, these are progressives, generally speaking. And yeah. I also will say, like, some of the Martha's Vineyard immigrants have come out and said, I'm glad I came. This worked out great for me. So to the extent to which they were lying, I still think it's an open question. I think it should be investigated. The pamphlets they were given, it's not that they were like fake, right? They took information from the Massachusetts government website. It's that some of that information didn't apply to these types of immigrants.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like to me that's a little more nuanced, and some of the information did apply. Like it said, here's where you go for resources in Cape Cod, which is where Martha's Vineyard is, for immigrants, blah, blah, blah. And some of it was about these programs Massachusetts has for immigrants, but they don't qualify for it. That could also have been like a mistake, not like a malicious lie. I don't know. I don't think these pamphlets are the smoking gun people are making them out to be, really.
Yeah, I saw some images online of them. I really just can't tell, so I don't want to weigh in on that yet or not. It does seem that there was, at the end of the day, these people were giving some false information about what they could expect when they got there. I think that's the gist of it. They were misled in this. Did it work out for them? Did it not? Et cetera, et cetera. We could debate that all day, but I think that's why I come down on this being such an unethical sort of shtick, is it really does seem like, again, it seems like the point was for them to get there and not get resources. Like that was the entire point of this stunt, was to prove something, and that's really just playing with lives and children's lives. Like I can't get on board with, and I cannot. This is one major issue I left the GOP over. Like I just think the attitude towards immigrants in recent years has become really gross, and it just feels completely untethered to the human life ethics that I hold. And I think that once you start getting away from seeing these people as valuable and as individuals, you get into these sorts of political games where you're playing with people's lives, and I'll just never really be okay with it. But that being said, when it comes to the ethics, that's very certain to me. When it comes to legality, that feels much murkier. And I've even seen some people going to further extremes and labeling this incident as human trafficking.
Yes, and you know who did that, Hannah? Everybody's favorite, the GOAT, the most popular political figure in America, Hillary Rodham Clinton. We've got a clip of good old Hillary here accusing Ron DeSantis of human trafficking.
I think, Joe, you have laid out the craziness of the time in which we're living, where some politicians would rather not only have an issue, but exacerbate it to the extent of literally human trafficking, as you said. And so many other Americans, I happen to believe still the majority of Americans, are good-hearted and generous. And when people end up on their doorstep in need, they're going to respond. They're going to feed them and house them.
So not only is this patently absurd, we'll break down the law in a minute, but isn't this kind of like, obviously I'm not a victim or a survivor, so I can't say this, but isn't it kind of freaking insulting to compare like a basically consensual travel to Martha's Vineyard to being human trafficked, people that are sold into sex slavery or like labor slavery and abused? It's a horrific crime. That to me feels pretty insulting to victims to be throwing this around like that.
It's not helpful at all. It muddies the waters. I think it diminishes the very serious nature of human trafficking and what most people are experiencing under this. It also continues to push this really false narrative around human trafficking, that the majority of it is like people being kidnapped and taken and put here. Like most human trafficking is local. It's done by people who are known to people. Like it's not this, Taken kind of scenario like the old movie that showcased that kind of issue. But yeah, I think this is unhelpful. I do think it's not only insulting to victims, but I think it, again, muddies the water and takes attention off of them. And maybe even if she's really trying to pursue human trafficking charges here, then it takes resources away from them in their cases. So this is problematic.
It's also just rich. I mean, wasn't she pals with Epstein?
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there. And also it's just not true, folks. So we have some quotes from legal expert Jonathan Turley. Human trafficking is not synonymous with moving humans in traffic. Seems like something Hillary Clinton should know. It is a legal term and a serious crime. It is always dangerous to introduce actual law into these legal claims, but it is worth noting a couple of salient facts. This is not a program designed to put people in peonage. It is not, and then under federal law, prosecutions on human trafficking are, quote, based on sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. It also includes the recruitment, harboring, transportation, yada yada, of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people being sent somewhere in a political stunt, not being trafficked into sex slavery or debt bondage or involuntary servitude. And so I just wish people could give it a rest with this. It's insulting to victims. And also there are legitimate, and Jonathan Turley even says this in his legal analysis, there are legitimate critiques and criticisms of what DeSantis is doing. But when you just go so far, and there's so much of this. You and I feel like half the time that we spend on this podcast is just talking about things where people take stuff way too freaking far. And that's just it's not helpful, it's counterproductive, and it's wrong.
Right. Things can, and I think it avoids the point that things can be morally reprehensible and still not illegal. Things can be morally reprehensible and be illegal, right? The law is not the standard of whether or not something is okay. And I think when you're constantly looking for ways to criminalize everything you dislike in society, you are a part of the problem, right? We need to move away from that kind of instinct. We need to find better ways of dealing with things we don't like. We need to be smarter and more capable of addressing instincts that we want to see go away. And so I can very much dislike what DeSantis and other governors are doing, and I do, and I speak out against it. And hopefully that pushback at some point has an effect on the situation. But to try to criminalize it, I think, again, it detracts from real, actual violent crime, which we are doing a very poor job of solving in this country these days, probably because we keep distracting our resources to these culture wars and other things like that. But it also, I think, it confuses people and makes them think that if something's bad, it has to be illegal. And that's simply not the case. You can say something's really wrong and shouldn't happen without looking to criminalize it.
And Hillary Clinton, of all people, should know this, that threatening to lock up your political opponents because you really strongly disagree with something they're doing is bad. Literally, they chanted, lock her up, and she was so outraged, and all her allies were like, this is a threat to democracy, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, when it's Ron DeSantis and she's no longer running for president, it's totally reversed, I guess. Ugh, this whole story,
All right.
this whole saga is rife with hypocrites all around. But we actually have some good news, right, for our next topic.
We do. Yeah, speaking of criminalization, let's go to the criminal justice system, where this week there is a major announcement. So if you're listening to a podcast, which right now you are, so if you're listening to a podcast, there is a really good chance that you either listen to Serial or were aware of Serial, because it was sort of the first podcast, right? There were other podcasts, don't get me wrong, but they were not blockbuster podcasts, okay? Serial came around, I think, circa 2012 or 2013, and it just blew the podcast game up. This was the first really slick produced podcast that you had, and it was also the first true crime podcast, and it really lit up this entire genre that I am incredibly thankful for, because I think the era of true crime has done more to push back on our criminal justice system than decades worth of work before, because for the first time we have made cases interesting to the average listener who never would have come face to face with the criminal justice system before or after, who maybe even thought these issues were sort of boring, or who maybe just had this sort of false belief, as I once did, that our justice system was structured to protect the defendant and give them all kinds of rights against the state, and that we really got it right most of the time, and we spent a lot of money and had the best, and the FBI and the CIA coming in and just being really detailed and how they went after cases, and that wrongful convictions were rare. True crime has blown those narratives out of the water, because it turns out when you start giving a microscope to, a large percentage of these cases, they fall apart really quickly, even for the average person of understanding. And so Serial was the first that did that. It came in, and it was a week-by-week sort of breakdown of this case of a guy named Adnan Syed. And he was a Muslim teenager. He was dating a Asian woman in high school, and they had this sort of very high school kind of, fairy tale, but kid book kind of relationship. And the whole point of it is that they were star-crossed lovers, because they weren't supposed to be seeing each other. Her parents wouldn't have supported her dating a Muslim guy. His community would not have supported him dating a non-Muslim. He was his family was pretty devout as Muslims. All that to say, they end up breaking up. And not much later, Hai Min is her name, I believe, she's found dead. And he is quickly identified as the murderer in this case. And so he's been in jail since about 1999 when it all went down. He was finally, I think he had 1 or 2 convictions. The last one was 2000. And I think he was sentenced life plus 30 or something like that. So not necessarily in jail for life, but most likely unless he got parole or something like that. The person who made Serial was an investigative journalist, more of an independent journalist type, which is also, a new era at that time that we're seeing kick off. And she was contacted by a friend of the family's who was an attorney. Also a Muslim woman, and she was like, I really don't feel like we got a fair shake given the region and what was going on racially at the time. This is 9/11. Given some of the lack of evidence in this case, it would really be helpful if you would look into it. So Sarah Koenig is her name, that produced the initial show, and she hosted it, and she blew it out of the water. And I think people were really shocked at how little evidence there was in this case, at how many shaky, unreliable witnesses had been involved in this case, at how little evidence had actually been gathered. And it really became quite apparent that there were certainly other people around that should have been examined. As one example, the girl's current boyfriend that she was dating at the time, he was never investigated. It was found out through the podcast he gave a faulty alibi for where he was when she went missing, and had said he was at work at Lens Crafters and had the manager of that store sign his alibi. Turns out the manager of the store was his mother. Just basic things cops did not identify or look into at the time.
It's crazy to me when these podcasters point out clear things you think the police would have checked.
Yeah. It's just very, very basic. So I want to roll this clip, but his conviction has just been overturned in Boston. This is very big news because the show concluded, almost 10 years ago. And so it blew up. It was a huge show. It launched the genre of true crime. And a lot of people have been very interested in his case ever since then and thought that this is sus, right? And I think the conclusion of listening to the show that most people came away with was not he's definitely innocent or he's definitely guilty. It was who could say? Because this case was botched, and he certainly shouldn't be in prison for life because of this. And so it's been going back and forth. I think the Innocence Project got involved. There's been a lot of people, but just keep in mind how long even this has taken, given the prominence of this case, the resources it then got. We are just now seeing results. So let's roll this clip from Boston yesterday.
Adnan Syed, who was serving a life sentence after he was convicted in 2000 of murdering his high school ex-girlfriend, Hai Min Lee. Adnan Syed is free from prison for now.
So basically, the ruling has ordered Syed be placed on home detention. He actually was released. He's got a GPS monitor. And Baltimore State Attorney, their office will basically choose whether to drop his charges or to try him again for this murder. They have 30 days to decide. That's actually pretty common in these situations. When you see a case thrown out, they have a decision to basically say if they want to try to do it again and do it the right way this time around, or to say, you know what, we probably messed up. We never had the evidence to go forward with this in the first place. I think that's likely what will happen here, because prosecutors were actually not fighting this hard. Prosecutors said a year-long investigation conducted alongside his attorney showed that authorities knew about at least one alternative suspect before his trial and withheld that information from his defense, committing what's known as a Brady violation. And this is very common, Brad. Like, I cannot tell you how common Brady violations are. They fall under prosecutorial misconduct, where the prosecutors basically have information they withhold and they just sit on it and nothing happens. It would shock you how nothing happens when they do this.
They do that?
Nope. One, prosecutors have absolute immunity. So that's even more than qualified immunity. And secondarily, the vast majority of judges, the vast majority of people who sit on state bar associations are former prosecutors themselves. So if a defense attorney does this, they'll come for their license, they'll go for their blood. But prosecutors basically are really very rarely reprimanded. We see this all the time. They said one of the suspects actually had threatened her, saying he would, quote, make her disappear, he would kill her. They have this in writing. Prosecutors also described one of the suspects as a serial rapist, saying the suspect was convicted in a series of sexual assaults after Syed's trial. Police discovered Lee's car near the residence of one of the alternative suspects, the state's motion said. So they haven't said whether or not they're going to dismiss the case, but I think they should. Absolutely. So I am really excited about this news. I think it's always important when we see justice, slow as it may be, in cases like this. And I think it's an important educational moment. And I think, it's just important to celebrate the success of serial and really the criminal justice movement that kind of came out of a lot of that, right? Where now when we see cases happening, you have a lot of internet sleuths, and that gets mocked a lot, but I think it's a great thing, the internet sleuths, because they're often much more detailed than the cops. They're actually, I've always told my family, if I go missing, go to the internet, don't go to the cops, go to the internet, they'll solve it a lot faster. I stand by that. And I think serial really kind of kicked that off. It taught people what to look for, and it's launched many other podcasts who've been chasing the success of serial.
I've never watched Serial, but I've watched Crime Junkies, and which is really popular, and they do all these cases about missing people, murdered people, abducted people, that kind of thing. And I'm always struck, the show definitely has a bias, right? The hosts clearly give kind of liberal vibes. They're not abolish the police, hard left it. They're really not. But
I actually think they're a little bit pro-police.
Sometimes, yeah. But
they kind of tend to listen to them a little too much, in my opinion.
I think, they're a little inconsistent. Sometimes I get, overly deferential vibes, but then sometimes I also give the vibes of, they really think the police messed up. But regardless, my point is just that I'm shocked by how many of these stories I'm just listening, and I'm like, the police did that?
Yeah.
So consistently, they don't take it seriously. They mess up the results. They find an easy suspect and just ignore all this other stuff. It's maybe it's an unfair sample size, right? Because these are extreme cases, but just it really has, for me, shined a light on a lot of police failures just from this super popular podcast. And I think that entire genre has had a huge influence. And that's kind of, as podcasters ourselves, that's kind of cool.
Right. I mean, I think it really did open the door for podcasting to be seen as instead of being academic and stuffy, it became entertaining and it became mainstream. And I think it's a wonderful medium. So I love what it did for the whole genre podcast. And I think it's worth going back and listening to Serial if you never have. It's a great listen. It's a good show. Couple more things I just want to point out about this case that I think pertain to larger issues in the criminal justice system. So I mentioned the Brady violation. Just to give you some idea of the scale of the problems with that, the National Registry of Exonerations, they estimate that over 50% of wrongful convictions occur because of official misconduct. That could be by police or prosecutors or the judge, but that includes a lot of Brady violations. And again, these people are not ever liable for that. Prosecutors have absolute immunity, police have qualified immunity. Those are really serious issues that have to be fixed in our system in order for there to be accountability and for there to ever actually be real fairness and equality and just like a trust, just a basic trust in our system that the people who are working within it are held to the high standards that they should be. I also think the thing about serial that's worth noting is just how often police identify the person they think did the crime and then build the case around that instead of letting the evidence lead them. Because if you listen to serial, it's like piece after piece after piece of evidence that poke total holes in just their basic timeline. I mean, just Sarah Koenig driving out with her friend trying to execute the timeline police say happened the day of the murder. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And they actually then used what's really very junk science to try to make their narrative stick. They used, in this case, something where it's called like cell phone tower data, where they try to say like, this cell phone pinged here, that means this person was within 50 miles of this, but it's not that reliable of data. It really is junk science. And they use that to convict him, which is often they do that. They use really unreliable methods and come before juries and say this is solid proof, and they get a lot of convictions that way. So people, especially if you're on a jury, you need to be very, very wary of the tricks that they pull in this regard and learn to really question things and question their evidence and question their narrative, because oftentimes they come in very confident, but they don't actually have that much to back it up, which was definitely this case. So all that to say, I'm hoping that this is the end of the road for Adnan. I feel very bad for Lee's family. She was unjustly murdered. It seems that the person who did that has never been apprehended, has been allowed to continue to roam freely. And this has dragged her family through the mud for decades now. And that is who really gets hurt at the end of all of this in our justice system, is the victims and their families who don't get justice, who don't get closure, who are misled about the outcomes, who are, in and out of courtrooms, in and out of the media, having to constantly relive these horrific experiences. And it's just very sad all around. So while we can be happy that justice is being served here, I think we have to stay very vigilant and upset about the injustice that's ultimately done to everybody involved in this scenario.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of injustice, Biden has admitted that the pandemic is over, but he is still refusing to give up emergency powers. I am so not shocked. I could have predicted that one. But you wrote about this week for Base. I think you've got a clip, so let's roll that.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it.
So what you guys just heard was a clip from this big 60 Minutes interview that Biden did with CBS News that dropped Sunday night. And I gotta say, before we get into the specifics of this interview was a hot mess. He
Aren't they all?
So many absurd things. The interviewer was like slightly skeptical, but not. It was hardly a grill session. But this one's jumped out to me, and I wrote about this because here Biden is admitting that the pandemic is over. And he's right. The pandemic is over in the emergency sense. It's been over. But what makes this crazy is that his administration has been insisting that it's not over. They've been extending, just on July 15th, they extended their emergency powers declaration again through October 13th because it gives them sweeping powers and lets them spend money on welfare without Congress. He's expected to extend it again through the midterm elections. So I don't know how Biden can admit the pandemic is over without acknowledging that surely his need for pandemic emergency powers is over too.
I mean, I think the simple answer is that because he knows nobody's coming in to check his power. So the Congress isn't going to do anything. Who's stepping in to stop him? This is predictable and predicted. And here we are. We said this is where we'd be. And I don't know. It seems like there were a lot of people who just didn't have the foresight to understand, like, these power grabs don't go away. They will continue utilizing them for the rest of our lives.
Right. And it's also, he just justified his big student loan bailout with the COVID as an emergency.
Right.
Like, that was, it's still illegal. But that was what he tried to use as the rationale. Yet here he is admitting that it's over. Make it make sense, because I can't.
Yeah, I can't make it make sense at all. I think what doesn't make sense to me even more so is, like, the complacency of the American population, that they just don't care, right? Like as a whole, they're just not paying attention. They don't really care. They're not outraged by this. And they don't have the ability to think 3 steps ahead, 4 steps ahead. Like if they use it for this now, what will happen in 10 more years? And I think you and I, and especially I hope people who've listened to Based, certainly the OG episodes, you can look at some of these moments in history where there were these power grabs, right? Especially during wartime. This wasn't a war, but I think a pandemic is an accelerated event that they can use in a similar method.
They treated it like a war.
They treated it like a war. And if you look back at things that were done, especially during World War I, those continue to have very serious repercussions in our economy and our civic society. And so many people, they see the problems around them, but they have no idea where they came from. And therefore, they have no idea how to prevent more of them from coming about. And this is that kind of scenario where you should understand that while this might feel small or feel inconsequential at the moment, there will be massive ripple effects from these kinds of things throughout history.
It's also might just never end, because I don't want to downplay the fact that like several hundred people a day are still dying from COVID. And that's really sad. It's unfortunate. But that's probably just going to be the case for ever now. It's going to be like the flu. It's going to be like other causes of death. And so if we accept the fact that the federal government are going to cling to their emergency powers until no one anywhere in the U.S. has COVID, then they get to keep them forever, which is why it's part of the problem with the very concept of emergency powers. I think is very flawed as a concept, but we really can't accept them to just keep them forever, because we all know it's over. For me, the true emergency was over as soon as any at-risk adult who wanted one could get a vaccine. At that point, yeah, whatever. You make your choices. You live with the consequences. But yeah, I just found this so maddening. And it was maddening to me as well because partly the people are complacent, but also partly the media they consume don't highlight these things for them. They just don't. Like even CBS, when he said the pandemic was over, there was no follow-up question. So are you going to end your emergency declaration?
Of course not.
The other coverage of this interview, the right-wing media is making these points, but the mainstream media just doesn't. They're just, they just repeat the talking points or explain it all away. And it's frustrating to me, but thankfully that's why people like you and I get to speak and talk about these things, because somebody has to call this out. And I'm glad that we are, because I just can't take the gaslighting. Gas is too expensive for us to be gaslit at this rate by this president.
I agree. And I think it's also, we cannot say it enough, but Americans have got to get over their fear of death, honestly. Like, death is a fact of life. There are so many ways you can die. And for many of us with COVID, we were always saying this, right? Like, yes, let's do what we can to take care of people. Yes, let's do what we can to preserve life. But shutting down an economy, giving a government tons of power, that doesn't save people's lives. Actually, the things that would have saved the people's lives would be like getting the regulations out of the way, right? Like, regulations got people killed during COVID, specifically in New York City, where they had these really protectionist and crony laws that mandated ambulances take people to overflowing hospitals and these kinds of things that never made sense, were never free market. And then when there's in the nursing homes, when there's actually a crisis, you get more people killed because of the government. You didn't save any lives because of the response to the pandemic. They needed to just get back, let the market produce tests, let the market produce vaccines, let the market figure out how to do this.
They made the test illegal at first. They said you have to use our CDC tests. Oh, but it didn't work. And then they finally allowed private companies to make tests. So we were behind the 8 ball from the beginning. We could go off all day, but the COVID pandemic in the United States is very much a history of government failure.
Yeah, it's example 101 of why you have to care about liberty over safety, period. And when you don't, you get neither. You get hard neither. So, all right, let's go to the mailbag from there. We have some people very in their feelings at the moment. I believe over a clip we posted yesterday about nationalism, national conservatism, when we were responding to some of the remarks made at that conference last week.
Our whole segment, really, all the clips pissed a lot of people off. So we're gonna we really upset some nationalist conservatives with our coverage, but we're gonna react to some of their comments because some of them were nasty, some of them were funny. Somebody replied to one of my clips where I said I was objecting to it on free speech grounds, saying eradicating wokeness is not something the government should be doing. And they said, you're obviously just scared because you're a homosexual atheist and the only thing you worship is the dollar. I wouldn't call myself an atheist. Definitely a homosexual. I wouldn't say I worship the dollar. Actually, I kind of make choices in my life that it's like if all I was pursuing money, I would be making very different choices. It's really not the move. But I think the reason I'm scared is just because I'm someone who values free speech and individual liberty, and they're saying we're going to force people to believe in what we believe, and I don't think that's cool. It doesn't really matter whether I was, a social conservative Christian or gay, a homosexual atheist. Either way, like that's just not good on the principle grounds. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's good cause to be concerned over that. Another person said to me, if I didn't know this person was a DC libertarian, I would assume that their resistance to them based on how they talk. Baby, I'm not a DC libertarian. Have never lived in DC. It's so funny. People always think I'm a DC libertarian because I'm successful. And I'm like, actually, I'm just a badass that managed to make it from like BFE in the South. Like, get over it. But no, I hate this thing like DC libertarian. Like, baby, we need more DC libertarians, okay? There's nothing wrong with somebody being a DC libertarian. Like, please, more people go infuse that town with libertarian beliefs. But what they actually mean by this is like, there's this weird perception by the like grassroots on the right that people who live in DC and who are libertarian are like woke and elitist and like not with them. And it's just, I don't think you've ever been to DC because I know most of the DC libertarians and they're pretty base. They do pretty good work up there. So
there's also just not a lot. They're like DC, the libertarian think tanks control everything. And I'm like, not even close. Like they have never been less impactful in terms of what the current government is doing than the last 5 years or so. So also like the DC regime, libertarian, blah, blah, blah. What they just really mean is that you're not like a fringe internet troll is not your aesthetic, right? And what makes them view us as establishment is just the fact that we view things like civility and respect as important values, honestly, and that we're not into trolling. That's all they really mean, because the policy differences between a DC libertarian and the podcast libertarian that they love are not large, really. It's more of just an approach that they love, the edgelord, ad hominem approach, and the kind of more civility, compromise, discussion, debate approach is something they've come to ridicule and despise. I also just think it's hilarious because you literally have never lived in DC. I've lived in DC, so you want to call me a DC libertarian? Okay. But this next one is more Jewish propaganda from the two of us. And I'm like, what? Neither of us are Jewish.
little anti-Semitism sprinkled in, always great. People think the anti-Jewish people always think I'm Jewish. I maybe because of my name, I don't know. But I'm like,
pretty sure I've been placed on lists of like Jewish journalist rhinos, and I'm like, based on what?
I'm like, my dad's Baptist. Oh well. But go ahead and out yourself. Somebody else said there's virtually no evidence that conservatives want to force others to conform. No evidence? It's the left that wants to use government power to force its agenda. Not sure how you could reach that conclusion. Well, I think we could reach that conclusion because we actually follow public policy and read the bills, and I can assure you there are certainly a number of ways that conservatives are currently working to use the government to force their agenda on people, both through very anti-free speech bills, very anti-market bills, specifically those going after big tech, using the government power to go after companies that don't act the way that they like. We could go on and on here.
But also, we were literally responding to a conference where they said, we need to use the government to push our idea of the common morality. Literally. This is their own words, what they want to do. I think this person just hopped in without a lot of context. And it does bug me when people comment without even taking time to read the article or watch the full video or whatever, because then, this next person says, y'all are a psyop. And I'm not quite sure what that means. Does that mean like we're like, what's the word? Staged opposition or something?
I don't get into the conspiracy theory Twitter.
I think the idea is that we're like propped up to be like the token opposition. So we're like probably paid by like the Democrats or whatever to just give like a feckless symbol of opposition that they can pretend to have and then just run over. I don't know.
What if the Democrats actually did pay us to come in and just defeat conservatives with like basic nuance and constitutional values and holding to capitalist views? And they were like, this is a psyop. These people are coming in and pushing back on conservatives with these elements. Like, if that's the Democrat strategy to defeat you, you should be really worried about the camp you're in. Like,
I would take the money too. I mean, I don't give. But we're not getting it, so.
Where's that
This
psycho
next
money?
person, and I want to talk about this because I hate this. They replied to you and said, repeal the 19th. And you get this a lot from the edgelords. This is the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave women the right to vote. Hannah, what do you
think they think it's gonna like get under my skin, and I don't care. I don't know. The feminist attacks like never really hurt me. Like, I know I'm so much smarter than you. I know I'm a better voter. Like, it's cope and seethe. It's not going anywhere. You lost that. I think these are men who like just desperately wish they could have women under their thumbs again, like, because they're never gonna be successful with women otherwise. That's my
sad. I mean, this guy
takeaway.
has a profile picture with what looks to be a daughter, and I'm like, that makes me. We won't show his name. Well, it's just an alt name anyway. But I just think,
of course,
to me, this is like a troll thing that they do. They reply to women having what they think are an opinion they disagree with and say, repeal the 19th. I mean, think about how messed up that is. That would be like a black person saying something you disagree with, and you say, repeal the 13th, right? Like that, which banned slavery. It's just so messed up. It's not edgy. It's not funny. It's not countercultural. It's just sexist, literally,
right,
and desperate. It's like,
and it's because you can't argue with me, right? That's kind of why it's funny. I'm like, it's kind of an L on you. You can't debate me. You can't defeat my arguments. So you just want to take away my ability to speak. Sorry, you're so incompetent. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's not going anywhere. So maybe get better at arguing if you actually
only
want to defeat women.
incels tweet this. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Only.
Yeah. And this person says, there is no creepier ideology than libertarianism. And I don't, like, explain this to me. Wanting to leave people alone and let them run their lives and do what they want is creepy.
Yeah, because these people want to come in and control you and make you live exactly as they want to, and they're really scared and creeped out by people who maybe want to live differently than them. That's the gist of it.
I don't get it. Cannot relate.
Past. This person said, base politics, you're a woke liberal. I agree that nationalists don't always appreciate some of the good points about capitalism as well as they should, but we have bigger problems right now. Bigger problems than defending capitalism? Sir, what? Like, oh, what are the bigger problems? Gay people are getting married? That's your bigger problem? People have pride flags in their yard? Like, no, we don't have bigger problems than capitalism being under siege. That makes absolutely no sense. And if you can't tell the difference between us and woke liberals, probably take a pause on your political involvement. You're just not quite there yet. Go kind of understand the ideologies a little bit more in depth, and then come back and we'll have a conversation.
Woke liberals literally despise us, especially
hate
me.
us. Yes, like hate. Like won't even like have a conversation. No.
Yeah, no.
That is not it. All right. And then the last person said, well, based on the replies, it appears you struck a nerve with nationalist spot on take. And I will say this. When you see this kind of like screeching, we did hit a nerve. We were accurate, I think, in our assessment of what they're trying to do. We were accurate in calling out the fact that people don't want this and that comes from a creepy place. And if that triggered you, maybe examine that and figure out why it triggered you. Because if you didn't think it was true, you probably wouldn't be all that upset.
Yeah, people got really in their fifis over this, and I think it's because they felt attacked and because we were over the target, shall we say. Yeah. So this last comment is not from the nationalism segment, but I just thought it was funny. Somebody said, Polumbo Cox 2024. Literally unconstitutional.
Yeah, he can't.
You realize how old do you have to be president? Wow, I feel like an idiot.
35. Wait, can we flip it? Can you be vice president?
No, to be president, you have to be, to be vice
35.
president, you have to be able to be president. So you have to be 35. So in
actually,
2020,
neither of us are able.
Yeah, neither of us would be able to be either. So keep wishing.
Sometime soon, maybe we'll see down the road. But we appreciate your support.
Would you ever run for president?
No, but I would be your vice president if you ran. Because vice president's kind of clutch. Like, it's mostly like a figure state kind of. You go to a lot of dinners. You know, I love a cocktail party. You get to travel internationally.
You would not be a good vice president, though, in a good way, because you're too, like, you have to basically just be a doormat, right? And, like, you have your own beliefs. You have a voice. You stir up controversy. Like, a vice president is really supposed to just be, like, quiet and smile for a photo op and go to a funeral. And it's like you would be like upstaging the queen at her own funeral. Like,
personality-wise, I would do better in the president role, and you would do better in the vice president role because you don't like being extroverted and going to these kinds of things and like smoozing. But I don't think I could take the heat for being president. I would get so fed up with people, like how you just have to be so nice to everybody and turn the other cheek. Like I don't think it's my thing. Honestly, I'm too upfront. So we'll leave that in the wings for now. But for now, Brad, what's your hot take this week?
So mine is that this is a toxic trait that I have that I think is totally fine, and I tweeted about this. But when somebody asks, if I order a Coke at a restaurant and somebody asks me, is Pepsi okay? I literally just look at them and I say no. And then I wait a few seconds, just straight face, and then I smile and I said, I'll just have water, please. Right? But it's like, Pepsi, I won't drink Diet Coke. I won't drink Coke Zero. That's all disgusting. I don't want any fake sugar in my drinks. It tastes like toothpaste, and it's not better for you. It's just not. That's all scam. And Pepsi is just not the same, not worth it. If I'm gonna drink that much sugar, I want my Coke.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Pepsi's gross. I come from a Coke family, though. My uncle worked for Coke, so we've always been pretty loyal to Coke.
So you are getting that Coke money.
I am getting that Coke money. But I'm with you, and I have seen you do it. It's quite funny because I think they're always like expecting you to be like, yeah, it's fine, and you're like, absolutely not, under no circumstance.
Well, it's just like I kind of watch what I eat, and so soda is something I only have occasionally, right? Because it's a lot of sugar. I never drink it at home. Once in a while at a restaurant, and if I'm gonna have it and have the calorie, in the sugar, I'd like to have it the way I like it, not some cheap knockoff.
I think that's more than fair. Well, my hot take this week is that people need to improve their reading comprehension, because we didn't get into some of these comments in the comment bag, but on a lot of my personal posts about the national conservatism, I had so many people being like, so you're mad at the founding documents, so you don't agree with the founding fathers, so you hate the Constitution, and it's just like, that's not what nationalism is. The amount of people who get up here in and this is just one example of many in my day-to-day life as an online person, that people read it, they have no clue what you're talking about, but they're triggered and they immediately think they should jump in and spout off. And I'm like, I have an intense fear of looking stupid. I live with that day in, day out, right? I hate messing up. I hate being uninformed. I hate looking stupid. More people need to get that energy and be afraid of looking stupid and learn to really read and think, do I actually know what this person's talking about here? Do I actually understand these words? Or do I need to go Google a minute and come back? Because you've got this Google thing right there at the tips of your fingers where you can actually just go check things and make sure that you're not randomly popping off and you don't know what you're talking about. So that's my hot take. Americans really need to step up the reading comprehension game.
Those government schools.
Dude, so bad.
All right,
guys. That's a wrap. We'll see you next week. And I won't, but Brad will and Jack will be back. Until then, stay based, and I'll see you after Paris.